Broadcasting the information the mainstream media won't touch. This is The Richie Allen Show in association with DavidIke.com.
I'm really happy to welcome back our next guest. The subject matter is very difficult. It's vitally important. And in light of what the BBC did today, it's absolutely timely that she should return to the programme. She's a renowned and a very, very highly regarded counsellor. She's based in Ontario in Canada. When she was last with us, she talked about her experiences counselling the victims of child sex abuse and her horror as more and more children and more men and women who've grown up now recounted their experiences of coming into contact with Satanic and Masonic groups and Satanism and Satanic rituals around the abuse that they suffered. It's a real pleasure to welcome back to the programme. It only seems like yesterday, but it's been 6 months since she was on, Sandra Fecht. Sandra, welcome back to the show. How have you been since we last spoke?
Excellent, and thank you so much for having me again.
It's great to have you on. I don't know if you're aware of this, but David Icke published a book only a few weeks ago called Phantom Self. It's been incredibly well received thus far, selling very well, as David's books do. And he was listening carefully to the interview, I shouldn't say interview really, to the conversation that you and I had on the radio last August. And he referred to it in the book and he referred to you in it. So pleased was he to hear people like you, somebody like you, coming forward to share your experiences. Before we chat about what's been going on since, Sandra, do you want to just remind our listeners, of course many of them will be new to the programme and maybe didn't hear you when you were on, explain how you came into contact with men and women, and particularly when you began to hear these awful stories where they started telling you about satanic rituals.
Oh, I'd be thrilled to. I'm sure some of your listeners will remember a time when sexual abuse was not believed. And I was a counselor in those days, back in the 70s and 80s, when we didn't think anything like that was happening. But I took a training program with Cindy Blazewski from the States, a 2-year training program on identifying sexual abuse. And there was what I called the therapy wars back in those days, where some people believed, some people didn't. And those who did believe were also a divided group, because we thought some thought that we should just ignore it, that we'd make it worse by bringing it up. And others, such as myself, that felt that if we were counselors, that we should deal with it indeed. There was a lot of pushback from the repressed memory people, who I hope have since been somewhat discredited. And in my search to help people find the sexual abuse that they had endured, I realized that the unconscious was the major hiding place of these events, and started to develop methods that would help people to uncover them. In the course of that, I started hearing story after story about people chanting and sacrificing babies and blood drinking and all the sort of ugly things that happen when you have these experiences, these ritual experiences going on. I didn't believe it. At first, I was telling people, stop avoiding and get on with the real issue. And I thought they were crazy and just needed to increase their medication. And sadly, that's still happening even today. And then one day something happened, and I thought, well, I'd better start really listening to this. And part of what happened was that I received a death threat to back off from this kind of work. And then my building was spray painted with what I later found out were satanic symbols. I had no idea there even were satanic symbols. I didn't believe any of this. And I made 3 police reports, and all 3 of them disappeared. And at that point, I realized there really, really is something going on here. So I was complaining to my hairdresser about how I'm hearing all these crazy stories, and I don't know if it's me or them or what's going on. And she suggested that I look at David Icke's book, The Biggest Secret. And so I did, and I was both encouraged by the fact that I was on the right track and absolutely horrified that it wasn't localized to my area, that this was going on all over the world. So that was my initial.
That was your initial. I love the honesty, Sandra. I mean, when I first started hearing stuff like that as well, I thought it was possibly, trauma, that the trauma had worked in such a negative way against the victim of the abuse that they began to imagine things that didn't happen. And, I really did, and I'm not qualified like you to be making those assumptions, but I did. I really did, until, like you, I began to read people like David and hear the same stories being told by people from different parts of the world, people who weren't connected in any way at all, weren't in contact, and the similarities were glaring. They weren't just kind of loosely associated, the stories, they were glaringly the same. It didn't do you any good, Sandra. I always think about counsellors and the wonderful work that counsellors do. I visited a counsellor many years ago because I had a very difficult childhood, and counsellors are wonderful people. And I think, how do you cope, because you hear such terrible things and terrible experiences of people. So when you started to think to yourself, my God, these stories are real, what did that do to you as a person?
Well, initially, it really shook me up, and especially after the death threat. I would watch my children coming across the parking lot, and for 10 years, I think I looked over my shoulder, and I just was concerned that I would be followed if I was leaving a building late at night. I would watch my children come across the parking lot and check around to see if anybody was following them, that sort of thing. And it left me on edge. And even when clients first find this stuff, they are on edge for a while. But I have a very strong faith. And when I teach this stuff, I suggest that people not get into it unless they have a strong faith, because what happens is that eventually you realize you're not fighting against flesh and blood, but against principalities and powers, and that the purpose of all these, pardon me, like really glaring, horrible rituals isn't just to do whatever overt thing you think might be happening, but it's also to steal our energy and steal our souls. And as odd as that may sound to people, that is indeed where the action is. Where
it's going. Now, can I just ask you on that? Were you particularly... I know I didn't get into this back in August. I specifically didn't get into this. But because it was our first time speaking, and you're always very careful as a presenter. You don't want your guests to be uncomfortable with you. And I didn't want to be delving in. But are you, or were you ever, a particularly religious person yourself, Sandra?
I've never been religious, and I'm happy if you ask me any question, Richie. I'm one of those open people.
Yeah, I know that now, yeah. But and of course, the only reason I'm asking that is because, some skeptics might say, well, if Sandra came through a particularly evangelical home, she'd be more likely to lend credence to these stories. But I knew the answer anyway.
Yeah,
I knew that you're a scientist, you're a woman of science, you're a woman of medicine. So,
well, I wouldn't say I'm science or medicine. What I would say is this, that I was always a child who was seeking. My father was Jewish. My mother was Presbyterian. They never got together on the religious thing. But I always wanted to understand what was going on. And ever since I can remember, I've been trying to figure things out. And I just came at it that way, from the trying to... I'm more of an intuitive person, and what felt intuitively correct to me. I do not go to I don't go regularly to church or anything like that. I embrace a lot of different aspects of faith communities. I love what the Buddhists do. I practice shamanism. But in the end, I am a Christian at this point, and hope it continues so.
Yeah, I just wanted to make the point that you have... And you stood to gain nothing by revealing that you had begun to believe these stories. As an old hack like I am, I've been around the block a few times as a journalist. You're always looking for the angle. You're looking for the money-making angle. With you, of course, there's none of that. You didn't have anything to gain in your business. By the way, Sandra's website is sandrafecht.com. Sandra Fecht, com. That's where you'll find out all about her and what she does. And that's fair to say, Sandra, it's not the greatest career move in the world, is it? To be talking. No, it isn't, though, is it? It isn't.
No, it actually isn't. And I learned that. Thank goodness for that. The model of what happened in uncovering sexual abuse, because I just know the backlash from the satanic abuse thing is going to be exactly the same. So I know what the road will look like. But people don't believe it. They marginalize you. They think you're a nut. Somebody told me the other day that they were talking with someone about my interview, and they said, this person I've never met said, "Oh, that nutter." So
Right.
I'm proud now to be an international nutter.
Yeah.
So there's nothing to gain. And a lot of these people are so marginalized that they don't have any cash to pay. And so you see a lot of them, just pro bono out of the goodness of your heart. So, yeah, it's not what I would call something to do if you want to be accepted by society, but it is something to do to learn this and to be a counselor or a hypnotherapist or a Reiki person or whatever, to be that person who's seeking the truth. There are huge rewards, but they're not necessarily external.
Couple of really important questions. I'm going to ask you for your thoughts on the unsurprising news today that the BBC's own inquiry into how Jimmy Savile and Stuart Hall and others were able to get away with monstrous abuse within the walls of the organisation. You won't be surprised to learn, you've been up, you're only 5 hours behind us, so you will know that the BBC basically absolved themselves of any blame. You won't be surprised to learn that. I wish we could all investigate ourselves, Next time to come after me for, you owe some council tax, Richie, or you owe this. I wish I could just investigate myself, because I would always be innocent. It's quite incredible, that. But the victims themselves, Sandra, who've witnessed the things that, when I spoke to you the following week, I had people on from Australia, I had people on from the United States who described these horrendous things, these child hunting rituals where children were hunted like quarry, like you would hunt a deer. You've heard all of this horrendous stuff. Is there any recovery? I'm asking.
Absolutely.
Is there?
Yes.
Go on.
Totally. There is total recovery. One of the things that I found, and I want to be sharing when I come to England, the second week of April, I think it is, April 8th, 9th, and 10th. And Joanne Lomax and I are putting on a workshop, a lecture on the Friday night, workshop Saturday and Sunday, to teach the methods for helping people to recover from this. But basically, it is possible. It's not straightforward. It's not short term.
There's no quick fix, basically. Yeah.
No, it's not a quick fix. It's one thing at a time. And if you take a look historically, we have been disenfranchised from the energetic part of ourselves. We've been told not to look at it. If you look at the witch burnings, where between 3 and 9 million women, according to the book Witch Craze, were burned for knowing this stuff. If you look at the imperialistic nature of the European nations who went around the world killing people for knowing anything about energy work, then you see what happens. Like in the United States, it was Jimmy Carter who repealed a law for the Native people, the First Nations people in the United States, to be able to do Sundance. I've been to Sundance, and 50 or 100 years ago, you were killed or incarcerated for doing that spiritual ceremony. But it is in this spirituality, it is in the energetics of a person that you really need to do the healing, because it is the triggers when people have gone through this, like everything at Christmas is a trigger. Everything at Easter is is a trigger. Everything at Thanksgiving or Halloween, because they have been put through such horrendous tortures and terrible experiences that when you are in a trauma, your entire energetic field collapses. And it's akin to going into your home and turning off the main breaker, and then nothing in the house works. The lights don't work, the fridge doesn't work, the TV doesn't work.
Yeah.
And it's the same with you as a person. When you've had this kind of trauma and your energetic field collapses, your thinking, your feeling, your body, your muscles, nothing works. And the whole trick is to learn how to turn that energetic field back on, to reclaim those missing soul parts so that you can behave normally, even if you hear Christmas carols, even if you're serving a turkey dinner.
You know, when I was a child, for many years, I was battered really badly. I mean, I'm not going to describe some of the things that happened. I'll never share that stuff, but I did with a counsellor for some time, and it was very helpful. But some of the things that happened to me were absolutely, well, they were horrendous. They're beyond imagining. And what it's left me with even today, and I'm happy in myself, and I know is that I couldn't have done anything to prevent it, and I know I didn't deserve it, and I went through all of that catharsis, and I understand it. But you know, if I'm in public at all, Sandra, and if I see a parent shouting at a child, even just shouting at a child, the adrenaline starts to pump through my body. Really strong, and I start to shake. Not visibly, but my hands start to shake. And I mentioned this to a friend before, and he said, "Oh, do you feel like kind of running over there?" And I said, "No." Strangely enough, even though I'm very confrontational as a person, I really am confrontational. I don't think it's that. I just want to get away from it. I don't want to hear it, and I don't want to see it. That would be a little trigger for me, you know, just to hear somebody roaring at a child or grabbing a child or smacking a child on the backside or something like that. It's very difficult even today. So I can understand. And of course, what I went through is nothing compared to some of the stories I've heard on here. Nothing. I wouldn't put myself in the same level as some of the things people have had to put up with. Running from people, chasing you with horses, with masks on. And I mean, Jesus Christ, Sandra, you know, how can they ever come through it? Yeah, I believe you when you say that they will if they get the right help.
Well, firstly, what I teach them is to believe themselves, you know, believe your truth. When you go inside, just tell me what you're aware of, what happened, and believe yourself. Secondly, you need to know that every trigger, every symptom is your best friend. That part is trying to say to you, there's this part of you that's broken and you don't know yet. And when we go back and we find the incidents, we find the triggers, and we find the programs and the events that happen to cause them. And when you get those three things, the events that happen to cause them, the triggers, and the programs, and then there's a movement method that I've developed that I call swaying, and you reset your energetic field, then you can approach that with calm. And if I may, Richie, and this is free, I won't even charge you, but when you start shaking like that, it's your energetic field telling you, hey, Richie, there's something here that you haven't remembered. Yeah. There's something here that's repressed, that's still hidden behind that cortisol barrier. The other thing I wanted to mention, just by the way, it's not to do with satanic abuse, but just for people generally, is that children who are raised in homes where there's a lot of shouting, it really wrecks their immune system, and it's not good for their health. So it's it's important that parents treat children with just as much respect as they can possibly.
I suppose a lot of people will be listening to that and they will say, every now and then they might think, I have a row with my partner. They might not ever shout with their children, but they might not be aware that even rowing amongst the parents might be very traumatic for children. I'm going to ask a few questions, Sandra, because the listeners are absolutely, they're right all over this. It's 24 and a half minutes to the top of the hour. Our guest this hour is Sandra Fecht. It's fantastic to have her back on the show despite the horrific topic, the nature of the subject. So we'll try and get through a few of these briefly, and I don't mean to insult you by saying that because there's so many of them coming in. But a very good one is, Sandra, have you alerted the authorities to your availability to help them understand that when people are coming to them, to the police, to tell them about their experiences, that they are not fantasizing? What a brilliant question. And that came in from Katie, who was listening to the programme in Durham, which is north east of here. Brilliant stuff, Katie.
Well, that is a brilliant question. And I think the thing is this, that I have connected with people at the the Ontario Provincial Police, but it is not always easy to get a hearing on this kind of thing.
They don't want to hear from you.
No, they don't. And so I'm just biding my time and, one by one training people how to be aware of this, teachers, first responders, that type of thing. And eventually the truth will come out. You just have to be very patient and train as many people as you can in the recognition and treatment of this. And sooner or later, there will be so many people coming forward, having the courage to come forward, saying to a therapist, this did happen to me. I don't need to be medicated. I don't need to be put in a mental institution. You need to learn what is going on. And challenging to make sure that the authorities start to get the training they need in order to spot this stuff and deal with it. So have I tried? Yes, I have. I've even offered my services for free, just for travel, hotel, and food. And everybody says there's no budget, we're not there yet, whatever. But it'll come around eventually.
Certainly will. Gio was on to say on Twitter, hiya, Gio. Has Sandra ever come across victims of hunting parties? Are there such things like this really happening? What do you think?
Absolutely. I've heard that story, not from many people, but from a couple. I've heard other horrendous stories, where children are trying to save other children and running and hiding, that sort of thing. Yes, I will confirm those stories.
Yeah, like I said, 2 or 3 different people came on this program and told those stories, unconnected people. Mm-hmm. And you think to yourself, yeah, I mean, I'm not a detective, but that's it. For me, that's it. When you get people from absolutely the opposite sides of the world saying that, well, there you go. Gary was on to say this lady, Sandra, is spot on. Recognition of the past is essential. Well done, Sandra. Martin was on to ask Sandra, what does she think about trauma being used as a tool to create mind control slaves? What do you think?
I think that's a great question. And absolutely. And war is an internationally sanctioned satanic ritual abuse. And when people go to war, they come back with such trauma that they're basically not that functional. And it is shown that trauma can be transmitted to children and children and children for 10 generations. The Bible says for 5 to 6 or 6 to 7 generations. But when you think about what happened in the Second World War, and when you think about the veterans, and both of my parents were veterans from that war. I'm from England, and both my parents were veterans from that war, and they were living in some kind of emotional twilight zone. And when you're a child being raised in it, you do not see it because you don't know any different. And so it takes a lot of work to sort of see, this is what fun is about, and this is what intimacy is about. But if somebody has been raised in that, they are so easy to mind control because their emotions are dead.
I used to think my grandfather's generation lacked intimacy and lacked affection around, say, my grandmother and others, because it was just, they were old school, Sandra, they were old fashioned. But you made me think again now.
Well, I went to live in 1970, I moved to the Northwest Territories in Canada. I mean, Canada is a pretty wide open country, lots of bush and forest and lakes and stuff, but you get that far north of 50. And it's, the people that I met had been living off the land as a tribal society. They had not been through the traumatizing industrialization that the Europeans had been through. They had not been through the wars that we have experienced. They were just a group of folks who lived off the land. And the men were so tender and so loving. I was shocked that men could even be like that. I always thought it was genetic. And the women were so grounded and so strong. And it was just amazing to see what happens in a society where you don't have the controls that we have, the industrialization, the war, the so-called education system. I just can't even begin to describe the difference.
Yeah, absolutely. It's 19 minutes to the top of the hour. I could listen to Sandra forever. We want to take a short break, a really short break. Sandra's staying with us. Go to sandrafecht.com to find out more about her. A terrific counsellor, a woman who became astonished at the stories being told to her by the adult survivors of child sex abuse, telling similar stories about these satanic rituals. And she's acted and she's telling people about it, which is absolutely fantastic because it needs to be accepted. You are asking her questions about Jimmy Savile. We'll put those to her when we come back. In the meantime, it's a very short break, so don't run off anywhere. Back in about 60 seconds.
Have you lost access to important data from a computer hard drive, mobile phone, or other storage device? Maybe you have a broken hard drive containing years of information, or a smartphone that no longer works from which you'd like the pictures, movies, and chats recovered. If you would like to recover data from any type of digital device, including desktop and laptop computers, external hard drives, cameras, smartphones, NAS, and RAID servers, then contact Data Clinic today at dataclinic.co.uk now.
Do you want to release the full potential of your soul consciousness and find out how to experience that power in all areas of your life now? Go to livingasyoursoul.com for free guidance with in-depth how-to articles, free healing meditations of creation recordings, free soul solutions, and much, much more. livingasyoursoul.com, making the profound practical.
Broadcasting the information the mainstream media won't touch. This is The Richie Allen Show in association with DavidIke.com.
And the programme broadcasts nightly on alternatecurrentradio.com, Fab Radio International, Fab Radio 2 here in Manchester. We're live on DavidIke.com, of course. My great friend and colleague and the biggest supporter of the independent media in the world. Nobody supports the alternative media more than David Icke. That is a fact. Go to davidicke.com. Our guest this hour is Sandra Fecht. Sandra is a terrific counsellor. I told you before the break, she's been, I'm going to say it, she's been blowing the whistle. That's what she's been doing. She's put her head above the parapet to say, to tell us what her patients have been telling her. It's vital. Now, she's going to be in the UK for the weekend beginning Friday, April the 8th. Through Saturday the 9th and Sunday the 10th. She's going to be in York at a workshop in York. York is absolutely beautiful. It's only been a few weeks that we went there. You picked a lovely place, Sandra. York is wonderful. I don't know if you've been there before. It's one of the greatest, one of the most beautiful historic towns in the UK. You're really going to like it. I think there'll be a lot of vibes there.
Well, I'm going to thank Joanne Lomax for choosing that place for us. Yes, I hear it's lovely, and no, I've never been, and I'm very excited to go. I'm more excited, though, to be teaching people about how to find and deal with this type of situation.
Fantastic. Now, where do people find out more about it? Do they just go to your website, or where do they go?
Well, if they email me at my name, Sandra Fecht, at rogers.com, SandraFecht at Rogers, ROGERS.com.
Brilliant. You heard that. Sandra.fecht at Rogers.
No.
Richie, you're terrible.
Sorry, Richie.
And I email you all the time, so I should know.
It's Sandra Fecht at Rogers.com.
Simple as that. Sandra Fecht at Rogers.com.
That's it.
Fantastic. And you'll find out about it. It's April the 8th, the weekend of April the 8th. It's in York, one of the greatest medieval historical towns in Britain. There'll be a lot of energy there. A lot of things happened in York. But to learn about how to treat, how to work with people who've gone through this, you want to get more information about that, Sandra Fecht at Rogers.com. Brilliant stuff, Sandra. 14 and a half minutes to the top of the hour. So what did you make then of the unsurprising news that the BBC, through Dame Janet Smith, who headed up the inquiry for the BBC over the last 2 years, basically came out and said that senior management at the BBC had no idea what was going on.
Well, that's a difficult question because I don't know that situation. But if I had to place money on this one way or the other, I would say that probably isn't true. That there are people, when you consider that probably as many as 1 in 4 or even 1 in 3 is involved in this as a victim, how many would be involved in terms of just knowing about it or perpetrators or, active in it? So I can't say for sure, Richie, but my guess would be that at least someone there knew and was either too involved or too afraid to say anything.
Absolutely. They said there was a culture of not reporting things. Ironically, before the report was actually published, even though, as you know, several days before publication, there are always leaks and people know what's going to be said. But before it was actually handed over today, Liz Kershaw, a woman who's very famous in the northwest of England, who is a presenter and was a presenter at the BBC, said that she was horribly molested while on air, while doing links, while introducing a programme. And when reporting it to senior management, they basically laughed at her and asked her, was she a lesbian? In other words, if you don't like it, you must be a lesbian. What was really interesting about that was that she said, basically, she completely contradicted the report and said that senior figures knew that there was a culture of inappropriate behaviour, at the very least. And of course, what Savile was doing was far, far greater than inappropriate behaviour. It sounds, though, Sandra, just to move away from today's report and just briefly talk about Savile, it sounds like Savile was up to his neck in Satanism and satanic rituals, doesn't it? Learning what we know about him now.
Well, I haven't followed the story, but anybody who would risk what he risked and have access to the children he had access to, it seems to me it is a possibility that he was. But something, that may be the greatest, if he was, I don't know if he was, but if he was, that could be the best thing in the world that ever happened for our cause, because then everybody knows and it's out there. And we know it's happening and that we need to do something about it. And it just takes people of courage to step up and say, you know what, I'm going to learn how to deal with this. I'm going to take it to my police department, to my hospital, to my school. I'm going to learn what it is, how to deal with it. And we're going to start confronting this and helping people who have been hurt by it. And I want to ask your listeners, are they people of courage? Will they step up and be counted? Like, break free from the change that we've been in, from this culture where we have to be good little people and it's all external control instead of following our internal truth.
It's really timely, again, you said that. Saturday at Piccadilly Gardens, right in the heart of Manchester city centre, Wake Up Manchester convenes again, where dozens and dozens of people come together to gently and in a very lovely way, talk to passers-by and speak using a PA system to talk to people about what's really going on, the corruption in government, the endemic corruption, the sell-off of the country to the corporations, everything you can think of. And people really need to do more as that, and they need to join in solidarity with people when people are having a bad time of it, when the system is screwing them to the wall, rather than ignore it and or worse, think, well, I'm glad it's him and it's not me, or I'm glad it's her and it's not me. We need to stand alongside one another and reconnect with one another on a community level. Even, some of the things we've spoken about on this programme in the past, Sandra, include, things like little things. They seem like little things, but they're not. That we don't know our neighbours anymore. We don't know who they are. We don't know their names. We don't know their children's names. We don't sit down with them. We don't break bread with them. We've become completely disconnected from one another, haven't we?
Yes, and part of it is that we've become disconnected from ourselves. Again, when I was up north, if somebody didn't like something, they had the power within themselves to make that decision. If a child, when I lived in Fort Providence, it was on the banks of the Mackenzie River, and that was a fast-flowing, massive river. And the parents would warn the child about sliding down at the bank and what could happen. But if that child wanted to do it, that was their call, and they took their own consequences. So you learn to inner reference. What we have so much, like, I remember being a child in an English school system, I couldn't even go to the bathroom without getting permission. I mean, who the heck do I need permission from to go pee? You know, it's such an externally controlled system. And from those tiny steps of childhood, we get increasingly more control, and then we lose touch with ourselves and with others. The biggest message I think I have to give is step into your heart space and learn to love yourself. I don't care what you've done. Forgive and love yourself, and let that extend to others, because this whole world is like a giant test to see if you can walk through it with peace and love no matter what is happening. And then when you can do that, you can be kind to others. I mean, the politics of the thing is just going crazy. I don't know if you, Richie, have followed what's going on in Florida with those laws that forbid feeding the poor.
Yeah. It's the same here. They're trying to criminalize it here. Yeah.
Yes, and they're criminalizing feeding the poor. They approached one 90-year-old veteran who was handing out food, guns drawn, and basically said, drop the plate. I mean, how ludicrous is that?
Criminalizing compassion.
Exactly. And I mean, it's been done before, except back then we were burned at the stake. Where's the heart in that? There is none. We have to keep our heart with random acts of kindness and love for ourselves and others, no matter what goes on, and that's the test.
Yeah, people need to read Rest in Peace, people like Howard Zinn, and read his lectures on civil disobedience. Zinn famously said, of course, the problem isn't with civil disobedience, the problem is with civil obedience.
I love that quote.
Wasn't it? And he was right, wasn't he? Why would you adhere to a law that says that if you see a young man or woman or an old man or woman sitting outside a shop and they look like they've had a bad time of it and they're on the streets, why would you decide, well, I won't offer to buy that lady a sandwich and a cup of coffee because the law says not? Why would you obey that law? That's a tyrannical law written by a madman or a madwoman, isn't it, Sandra?
Of course, because we're all stuck, or not all of us, thank God, but many people are stuck in fear, and they think they're being good, and they'll get approval from some archetypal mummy and daddy if they do that, instead of following their own kindness. You've got to follow your own kindness.
Follow your heart. I want to mention, we're just out of time today. We certainly won't leave it as long as 6 months before you come back on. I'm going to try and get up to York to say hello to you at least when you're there. I'm going to mention that again. Sandra is going to be in York over the weekend of April the 8th, which is Friday, Saturday the 9th and Sunday the 10th, working at workshops there in York. Now, I've already tweeted it out. It's sandrafecht@rogers.com. That's the email address, sandrafecht@rogers.com. I've tweeted that out there to find more details on the workshops and how to attend. Glad you're out there, Sandra. When all of this is going on, I'm glad there were counsellors like you, compassionate people like you, to speak out about these things, but also there for the victims of what are just absolutely unimaginable crimes. It's always a pleasure to have you on. I'll give you the last word, and then we'll part company for now.
Well, firstly, I want to thank you for this opportunity and for your courage. And I want to thank everybody out there for their courage in stepping up and doing what they know is the right thing to do. Good luck with that.
Sandra, you're brilliant. SandraFecht.com, everybody. Sandra, talk again real soon.
Thanks, Richie. God bless.
You too. Bye for now. Sandra Fecht on the line to us there from Ontario in Canada. Special lady, I believe.